Love is Blind Sweden has been an emotional roller coaster, and episode 4 is no exception. There are so many things that I need to discuss, and because my battery is dying, I am going to jump in right away and talk about all that I have just seen. Oh my gosh. The first major moment we see is when all the couples get back together and the host begins asking each and every one of them, how has their experience been thus far? And Lucas decides to say that it was challenging, which blindsides Amelia and embarrassed her. It's one thing to have a private conversation between you and your partner, or maybe even a close friend, but to talk about that in front of everyone, it's just embarrassing. It's really embarrassing. And there's this moment where Christopher is talking to Amelia and is trying to make it seem like Lucas is really into her, and he's like, oh, he thinks you're so intelligent. He likes all of these different qualities about you. If you have to do mental gymnastics in order to trick yourself into falling in love or being attracted to your partner, it's not gonna work. But what I will say about Lucas is, while he is not attracted to Amelia, I'm just glad that he has not slept with her yet, because I've seen in other seasons or different shows where the man is clearly not physically attracted to the woman and still sleeps with her anyway. And so that creates a whole onslaught of confusion as well as insecurity. So kudos to Lucas for not doing that, but I think Amelia should just end this relationship because I don't think it's gonna get any better. I would say the next major event in this episode is Christopher coming to terms with the fact that Katya is just not that into him. I will say throughout episode 3 and at the beginning of episode 4, it came across as though Christopher was almost delusional and thought of Katya as almost this goddess-like figure. He gave her so many compliments. He thought that they were having a great progression and vibe in their connection. And so it was great to see later on in episode 4 him say that he's actually just really scared to have that type of conversation with Katya, and he recognizes that she hasn't even given him a compliment. And for those who might have read this as almost a yellow flag, like, oh, why does he need compliments? Men are human beings too, and as much as we talk about being nice to women and saying nice things to women, it's also important for men, being emotional beings as well, to have that reciprocated. And so I think that Christopher deserves someone who is going to give him compliments willingly, and it doesn't need to be forced. And so I personally do not foresee this relationship going pretty well. Another topic that I think is very interesting to talk about in episode 4 is this idea of being an immigrant or a foreigner, especially when it comes to Mira and Oscar. At first, in episode 3, I thought that Mira was just trying to find things in order to be upset with Oscar and say why this would be a really bad fit. But it wasn't until Mira talked about Oscar's chubbies that it started to actually make sense for me. So Mira talks about how Oscar is kind of this stereotypical Swedish guy. He wears chubbies, he goes boating, he's like the all Swedish boy, kind of like the all American boy. And it's funny that she mentioned chubbies because in the US, men wear chubbies all the time, and I often associate men who wear chubbies, especially white men who wear chubbies, as being the all-American boy, the type that may be a little bit more conservative, has probably, have a decent amount of money within their family, they have generational wealth, and they might have joined a fraternity. And so that type of vibe, I can understand why Mira might be a little hesitant about that. In addition, I actually went to Stockholm a few years ago, and I got to talk with some immigrants while I was there who also spoke Swedish, who had been there for quite a few years, and each one of them mentioned the sentiment about feeling like an outsider, even though they've tried so hard to assimilate within Swedish culture. It's a bit harder for you to make friends and to actually feel like you are accepted within their society. Unlike in the US where you could just strike up conversation with random people and that be pretty normal, that is not considered normal in Sweden. But on the flip side to that, I have to say, Mira, this is Love is Blind Sweden, so I don't think she should be surprised if she matched with a stereotypical Swedish person. Maybe she would have been better off Love is Blind USA, or maybe even Love is Blind Brazil, just because those are a bit more diverse. But expecting diversity in this particular kind of show with this particular kind of country, I'm just kind of like, girl, you should have gone somewhere else for that. Okay, and one of the last things that I want to talk about that came up was the conversation had between Katja and Rasmus. What I was really concerned about is in past seasons of Love is Blind, when the castmates come together outside of the pods, they meet each other, they have their conversations. Sometimes old flames lead to very disrespectful conversations. And I was so pleasantly surprised by the amicable nature of this conversation, as well as the respectful nature of this conversation. I know there was a question made by Katja and Rasmus about, oh, what do you foresee being difficulties in your relationship? And honestly, if an ex of mine were asking those particular questions, I would not want to answer them, but something tells me those were questions that were given to them by production. But ultimately, what I will say is, just in general, the conversation was pleasant. It was not flirtatious, it was not sexual in any way, and there were no jabs made at either of their partners. So I would say that was a refreshing conversation. Other than that, I am really excited to see what happens in episode 5 of Love is Blind Sweden. Let me know what you think about my breakdown for this episode. And yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching. Bye.